The hostility between Sophie Cunningham of the Indiana Fever and Jacy Sheldon of the Chicago Sky didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's the product of a history littered with bruises, hard fouls, and bad blood that stretches back months, maybe even years. The tension first became glaringly obvious on May 30th, during a regular season matchup that would become infamous among Fever fans. That night, Sheldon's aggressive style crossed a line for many viewers. She didn't just battle for position. She delivered the kind of contact that leaves a mark literally. In one stretch of the game, she injured Sophie Cunningham in a scramble, caught Sydney Colson in a dangerous collision, and, in what many saw as the most controversial moment, made direct contact to Caitlin Clark's face. Fans online were quick to dig up college-era clips showing Sheldon's overly physical matchups against Clark when Iowa played Ohio State, suggesting this was more than coincidence, this was a pattern. Whether Sheldon was targeting Clark specifically, or simply playing her usual brand of relentless defense, the result was the same. Bruised bodies, angry teammates, and a growing narrative that Chicago wasn't afraid to get extra physical when Indiana came to town. This May 30th game planted the seed. For Sophie Cunningham, who has a reputation for playing tough but fair, it was the first sign that Sheldon's approach to Clark and the Fever might need answering for. But at that moment, the scoreboard, not revenge, was the focus. No one knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a brewing rivalry that would soon explode in dramatic fashion. By the time the Fever and Sky met again, the whispers had become a roar. Was Jacy Sheldon deliberately targeting Caitlin Clark? Clips from both college and the WNBA told a compelling and, for some, infuriating story. Over and over again, Sheldon's defensive matchups with Clark ended in excessive contact. It wasn't just hard defense. It was face smacks, shoulder bumps, and hip checks well outside the flow of play. In their college days, Sheldon had been a defensive thorn in Clark's side, pressing her full court and using every ounce of physicality to disrupt her rhythm. But now, in the WNBA, with Clark drawing national attention and media coverage unlike any rookie in decades, each hit landed heavier, not just physically, but symbolically. Fans saw it as a calculated effort to humble the league's brightest new star. One particularly telling sequence came during a mid-season game. Clark was bringing the ball up the court when Sheldon, rather than sticking to the ball, seemed to drift slightly into Clark's lane and delivered what looked like an intentional bump to the ribs. Commentators replayed the moment in slow motion, noting how Sheldon's eyes weren't even on the ball, they were locked on Clark's positioning. Later in that same game, another moment ignited outrage. As Clark went up for a jump shot, Sheldon's arm swung upward and caught her in the face. No whistle, no warning, just play on. For Sophie Cunningham, who had already been on the receiving end of Sheldon's rough style, the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Each game added another layer to the tension, and Clark's teammates started to close ranks around her. But still, the league's officials weren't sending a clear message that this kind of physical targeting would be punished. That silence from referees and from the league was about to become a central part of why Cunningham eventually decided enough was enough. If Jacy Sheldon's physical play was the spark, Marina Mabrey was the gasoline. The escalation came during the highly anticipated June 17th rematch between the Indiana Fever and Chicago Sky, a game already charged with emotion from their previous encounters. Early in the contest, Sheldon reignited controversy by catching Caitlin Clark across the face while defending her on a drive. It wasn't a full-on swing, but it was enough to send Clark staggering, blinking, and clearly rattled. Again, no foul was called. But the true boiling point came later, when Marina Mabrey, Chicago's fiery guard known for her trash talk and aggressive style, decided to send her own message. As Clark ran the fast break in the third quarter, Mabrey stepped directly into her path and delivered a shoulder check that knocked the rookie flat onto the hardwood. The collision was so jarring that the arena gasped in unison, not just because of the impact, but because it was entirely avoidable. Clark wasn't dribbling into contact. Mabrey moved into her lane after the play had already developed. Cameras caught the Fever bench erupting in protest. Kelsey Mitchell was on her feet yelling toward the officials. Nalissa Smith waved her arms in disbelief. And Sophie Cunningham shot a glare at Mabrey that could have melted steel. Commentators immediately speculated whether this was a coordinated effort from Chicago to test Clark's toughness or worse, to intimidate her out of her game. Social media exploded. Clips of the body check racked up millions of views within hours, with captions ranging from "This is basketball" to "This is assault." The divide between old-school physicality and player safety became the hottest debate in WNBA discourse that week. For Cunningham, this was no longer about rivalry. It was about a pattern and a very public message being sent to her rookie teammate. And whether the referees wanted to acknowledge it or not, Sophie was keeping score in her own way. The incident with Mabry planted the final seed for the confrontation that would later make national headlines. By the time that June 17th game wound down, fans and players alike were asking the same question: where were the referees? It wasn't just one questionable no call, it was an entire pattern of them. From Sheldon's face contact to Mabry's shoulder check, the officials seemed unwilling, or perhaps unprepared, to blow the whistle on anything that crossed the line against Caitlin Clark and the Fever. The frustration was palpable. On the court, Fever players were throwing their arms in the air after every collision, only to watch play continue. Clark herself, not known for overly dramatic reactions, could be seen shaking her head in disbelief more than once. Sophie Cunningham, who's been in the league long enough to know how the officiating ebb and flow works, recognized this wasn't just letting them play. This was selective enforcement, and it was dangerous. Fans weren't having it either. Online, hashtags like "Protect Caitlin Clark" and "Do Your Job Refs" began trending within hours. Sports talk shows dedicated entire segments to questioning why the league's most visible new star seemed to be taking more physical punishment than any other rookie in recent memory. Was it bias? Was it an unspoken desire to toughen her up? Or was it simply incompetence? Adding fuel to the fire, post-game interviews revealed a telling detail. Clark admitted she wasn't surprised by the hits anymore. "You learn to expect it," she said, in a tone that was equal parts defiance and resignation. That statement was damning. A rookie should not be expecting unpunished dangerous contact as a normal part of her game experience. For Sophie Cunningham, this was the tipping point. She'd watched her teammate get targeted, shoved, and knocked down without adequate protection from officials, and she knew the unspoken rule of professional sports. If the referees won't stop it, sometimes the players have to. The stage was set for an act that would blur the lines between retaliation and justice, and Cunningham was more than ready to play that role. For Sophie Cunningham, June 17th wasn't just another game. It was the day years of quiet restraint finally gave way to a boiling storm. Cunningham is no stranger to physical basketball. She's built her career on hard defense, hustle plays, and a willingness to mix it up when the moment calls for it. But there's a difference between playing hard and playing dirty, and in her eyes, the Chicago Sky had crossed that line more than once. By the fourth quarter, the scoreboard felt irrelevant compared to the growing undercurrent of hostility. Sophie had watched Caitlin Clark, a teammate she openly admired for her competitiveness, get knocked to the floor repeatedly, face-swiped, and body-checked without so much as a warning from the refs. The image of Mabry's shoulder check still burned in her mind, not just because of the hit itself, but because it was celebrated by the opposing bench. Cunningham's competitive nature has always carried a code. You protect your own. She knew Clark was still adjusting to the WNBA's pace and physicality, but she also knew that if this treatment went unchecked, it would become the league's playbook against her: beat her down, frustrate her, and get in her head. Sophie had been in similar situations earlier in her career, and she understood that sometimes the only way to send a message was to deliver one yourself. The tipping point came late in the game when Sheldon once again crowded Clark at the three-point line, making heavy contact with her shoulder. As the refs swallowed their whistles yet again, Sophie's decision crystallized in her mind. She wasn't going to wait for the league to step in. She wasn't going to hope the next game would be cleaner. She was going to act now. What came next wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate. Sophie's face was calm, almost unreadable, as she lined up for the next defensive set. But inside, the switch had flipped. The unspoken message she was about to send was simple. You don't mess with my teammate without dealing with me first. It happened so fast, the broadcast replayed it from 4 different angles just to piece it together. Late in the fourth quarter, as Chicago brought the ball up the court, Sophie Cunningham was locked in on Jacy Sheldon. The rookie guard had been in Clark's face all game, hounding her on both ends, delivering just enough contact to disrupt rhythm without drawing a whistle. To Sophie, this possession was her moment. Sheldon caught a pass on the wing, pivoting toward the basket, and that's when Cunningham closed in. The contact was hard, decisive, and unmistakable. Sophie didn't swipe at the ball. She stepped into Sheldon's space, shoulder first, making it abundantly clear this wasn't just about defense. Sheldon stumbled back, losing her balance, and the sound of the collision echoed through the arena. The crowd gasped, some roaring in approval, others booing in outrage. What made the moment even more intense was Sophie's demeanor. She didn't yell, she didn't posture, she simply stood her ground, staring at Sheldon for a brief, charged second before jogging back on defense. It was the kind of calm defiance that speaks louder than words, a veteran's way of saying, "Message delivered." The refs immediately blew the whistle, but their call was telling. Just a common foul. No flagrant, no review, no further action. The Chicago bench erupted in protest, demanding a harsher penalty. Meanwhile, the Fever bench rose to its feet, clapping and shouting encouragement towards Sophie. Even Clark cracked the faintest smirk, knowing exactly what that play meant. In the eyes of many fans, that confrontation was the turning point, not of the game, but of the rivalry. Cunningham had made it clear that if officials weren't going to protect her teammate, she would. And unlike the subtle bumps and borderline plays from earlier, this was an overt warning. "We can play physical too." The moment went viral within minutes, with highlight reels labeling it everything from old-school toughness to premeditated retaliation. And while opinions were split, one thing was undeniable: the temperature of the Fever Sky rivalry had just shot through the roof. The instant Sophie Cunningham's shoulder met Jacy Sheldon's body, the game stopped being just basketball and became a storyline that would dominate sports media for days. The replay clips exploded across social platforms before the final buzzer even sounded. ESPN analysts were already debating intent during the post-game wrap-up, while Twitter, or X, as it's now called, was split between praising Sophie for defending Caitlin Clark and condemning her for what some called a cheap shot. Morning talk shows seized on the narrative. On one end, pundits labeled Cunningham the enforcer, the veteran presence willing to risk fines or suspension to protect the league's hottest young star. On the other end, critics accused her of escalating tensions unnecessarily, pointing out that the Fever Sky games were already charged enough without adding fuel to the fire. The language was heated. Dirty play, send, a message foul, unprofessional conduct. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict depended entirely on which jersey you wore. What made the media storm even bigger was the context. This wasn't just Sophie Cunningham making a hard play in a random mid-season game. It was Sophie Cunningham stepping into the heart of the Caitlin Clark debate. Clark's arrival in the WNBA had already polarized fans, with some celebrating her as the sport's next transcendent star, and others resentful of the attention she commanded. By physically confronting Sheldon, Sophie had positioned herself firmly on one side of that divide. The coverage only intensified when former players weighed in. WNBA legends like Diana Taurasi and Tamika Catchings offered differing takes, some saying this was the kind of toughness the Fever needed, others warning that retaliation always carries risks. Meanwhile, highlight packages of the hit ran on repeat across sports networks, each one accompanied by slow-motion zoom-ins on Sophie's expression, Clark's reaction, and Sheldon's fall. Within 48 hours, Cunningham versus Sheldon wasn't just a play. It was a headline, a hashtag, and a flashpoint in a growing conversation about how the league treats its rookies, its stars, and the code of conduct between players. And while the WNBA front office stayed silent for the moment, fans knew that the fallout from this confrontation was far from over. The impact of Sophie Cunningham's confrontation with Jacy Sheldon didn't end when the final buzzer sounded. It carried straight into the Fever locker room, shaping the culture and mentality of the team in ways that no stat sheet could ever capture. Players who had previously relied on Caitlin Clark's brilliance alone began to realize that there was someone in their corner who would actively enforce boundaries and protect the roster. This wasn't about intimidation for the sake of ego. It was strategic, deliberate, and deeply resonant with teammates who had endured reckless plays from opponents. The locker room buzzed with a mixture of adrenaline and respect. Veteran players openly praised Sophie, noting that her fearless approach had shifted the team's psychological dynamics. Younger players, many of whom had watched Clark take multiple uncalled hits throughout the season, suddenly felt empowered to play with confidence and aggression without fear of being left exposed. Coaches observed a remarkable change as well. Team discussions began centering not just on offensive sets or defensive schemes, but on accountability and mutual protection. Sophie's action also prompted a broader discussion about responsibility in high-stakes games. Questions circulated. Should players step in when referees fail to enforce safety? Does the league adequately protect its marquee athletes? Or are stars like Clark forced to rely on their teammates' enforcement? Cunningham's assertive play essentially answered both questions. Yes, teammates must take responsibility, and no, the league's current safeguards were insufficient. Yet this newfound energy didn't come without tension. Some teammates worried about potential suspensions or fines that could hurt the Fever's playoff chances. The coaching staff had to carefully manage the balance between embracing Sophie's enforcer role and ensuring that the team didn't cross the line into reckless retaliation. Even so, the consensus was clear. In a league where aggressive physicality is sometimes tolerated, having someone willing to defend the team's star was invaluable. By the end of the locker room meeting, there was a palpable sense of unity. Sophie's statement on the court had transcended a single play. It had become a cultural touchstone for the team. Players understood that they weren't just defending Clark. They were defending the identity and pride of the Fever. This moment became a rallying point that would resonate throughout the rest of the season, influencing how players approached physical confrontations, social media narratives, and team chemistry in every subsequent game. When Sophie Cunningham signed Jacy Sheldon's rookie card with the bold declaration, "Property of Sophie Cunningham," it wasn't just a personal jab, it became a viral sensation that rippled through WNBA fandom worldwide. Fever Nation immediately recognized the moment for what it was: a rare blend of humor, toughness, and accountability that perfectly captured the team's ethos. Within minutes, the clip circulated across social media platforms, garnering thousands of likes, retweets, and comments, each adding layers to the story of Sophie as the ultimate enforcer. Fans were captivated not just by the act itself, but by the context behind it. Those who followed the May 30th game remembered the reckless plays that had left Cunningham and her teammate Sydney Colson injured, as well as Caitlin Clark being eye-poked by Sheldon with no penalties enforced. This social media eruption wasn't just amusement, it was collective validation. Fans felt that justice had been served on their screens in real time, an act of poetic retribution that resonated far beyond the boundaries of one arena. Memes popped up almost immediately, dubbing Sophie Black Belt Barbie in recognition of her martial arts background and fearless demeanor. Merchandise mock-ups began circulating, featuring the "Property of Sophie Cunningham" tagline, cementing the moment as both cultural and commercial gold for the WNBA. The reaction wasn't limited to Fever loyalists. Neutral basketball fans, previously indifferent to the league, were drawn into the drama, captivated by the storyline of a young star enforcing the rules that referees neglected. Even fans of rival teams acknowledged the significance. Cunningham's action was a statement to the entire league that recklessness would no longer go unchallenged. Social media feeds became battlegrounds for debate, praise, and analysis. Sports commentators dissected the incident endlessly, weighing the legality, morality, and long-term impact of Sophie's enforcement. Some argued it was excessive, while others highlighted the need for teammates to take action in a league where officiating can sometimes lag behind the pace of the game. This social media explosion also amplified Caitlin Clark's narrative as the league's most targeted player. Fans began actively defending her in online conversations, praising Sophie for stepping in when officials failed to do so. Clips of the bear hug foul, juxtaposed with Sophie signing the rookie card, became symbolic shorthand for Fever team loyalty. The conversation surrounding Sophie Cunningham was no longer confined to Indiana. Fever circles it had gone national, and for a moment, the WNBA storylines became about justice, loyalty, and personality as much as statistics and rankings. In essence, the fans had turned Sophie's enforcement into a cultural touchstone. It illustrated the power of individual action to shape league narratives, fan engagement, and social media discourse. A single signature, executed with wit and authority, transformed a potentially minor in-game scuffle into a lasting legend of teamwork, accountability, and spectacle that would define the 2025 WNBA season for Fever supporters and casual observers alike. The Sophie Cunningham incident didn't just light up fans' feeds, it put the WNBA officiating under an intense microscope. From the moment Jacy Sheldon's aggressive plays went unchecked during the May 30th game, questions about the competence, bias, and consistency of the referees began swirling. Experts and commentators dissected every call or lack thereof, pointing out that fouls which should have been flagged repeatedly went ignored. A allowing reckless physicality to persist. In sports, officials are the guardians of fairness, and on that day, many felt the guardians had been derelict in their duty, creating the environment that made Sophie's dramatic signing moment necessary. League insiders revealed the tension backstage. Referees reportedly received multiple complaints from Fever staff, highlighting dangerous conduct that could have escalated into serious injury. Yet, the game continued with minimal enforcement. Analysts argue this lapse exposed a systemic problem, a disconnect between on-court reality and officiating oversight. It's not uncommon in professional sports for officials to err, but in high-stakes games with playoff implications, repeated oversights spark intense scrutiny. Cunningham's decisive act, therefore, became a form of public accountability, spotlighting the officials' inaction and forcing league executives to confront uncomfortable questions about training, evaluation, and disciplinary procedures. The controversy escalated when veteran referees spoke on record, defending their calls but acknowledging the difficulty of keeping up with Fever players' fast, physical style. Critics, however, argued that excuses only amplify frustration, especially in a league aspiring to grow its reputation and fan base. Calls for transparency surged, with some fans demanding post-game review footage and disciplinary reports to be made public. Social media polls and sports talk shows debated whether the league should implement stricter officiating protocols, including independent oversight for critical games. Sophie's act became emblematic of a larger debate. Should players be forced to police themselves when officials fail? Some argued that enforcing accountability is admirable but dangerous if it sets a precedent for vigilante behavior. Others celebrated the moment as a necessary intervention, proving that players can protect their teammates and maintain game integrity when officiating falls short. The incident, therefore, didn't just entertain. It forced a public conversation about the structure, consistency, and credibility of WNBA officiating. Ultimately, the Sophie Cunningham saga illustrates the delicate balance between athlete enforcement and official responsibility. It became a defining moment in the league, highlighting that one player's courage and initiative could ignite debate, expose systemic weaknesses, and pressure the WNBA to take proactive measures to ensure player safety and fair play. The ripple effect is ongoing, and how the league responds may set a precedent for years to come. Beyond the physical plays and officiating controversy, the Sophie Cunningham incident revealed the hidden psychological battlefield that unfolds in professional sports, particularly in a league like the WNBA, where mental toughness is as critical as athletic skill. Inside the Fever locker room, the tension was palpable long before the signing moment made headlines. Sources indicate that players were already navigating a high-pressure environment fueled by expectations, rivalry, and the constant scrutiny of fans and media. Cunningham's action, though dramatic, was also a calculated psychological maneuver. It sent a clear message. No one on this team would be sidelined, ignored, or undermined, even in the face of inconsistent officiating. The move sent shockwaves through both teams' dynamics. On the Fever side, teammates rallied around Cunningham, their confidence visibly heightened, creating a surge of unity that translated into a more aggressive and cohesive on-court performance. Analysts noted that the team seemed emboldened, moving with sharper precision, communicating more openly, and exhibiting a fearless approach to plays that previously might have been tentative. The act became more than a spectacle. It was a catalyst for internal motivation, demonstrating how psychological strategies can influence game outcomes as profoundly as physical performance. Conversely, the Chicago Sky reportedly experienced a disorienting effect. The sudden, bold display disrupted their rhythm and forced them to recalibrate their mental approach mid-game. Opponents often thrive on exploiting hesitation, and the Sky's adjustment struggles showcased how a single player's psychological intervention can shift momentum entirely. Sports psychologists have long emphasized that perception, morale, and mindset can alter performance metrics. Cunningham's move became a textbook case study in this phenomenon. Additionally, the incident reignited conversations about leadership in sports. Cunningham, previously viewed as a star scorer, now also emerged as a de facto leader who could influence team cohesion and morale under duress. Leadership, after all, isn't just about points or stats. It's about setting tone, influencing behaviors, and creating a culture where every teammate feels accountable, protected, and empowered. For Fever fans, this moment wasn't merely a highlight. It symbolized a deeper philosophy that could define the team's season. Finally, the psychological impact extended beyond players. Opposing teams, analysts, and even casual viewers began questioning the Sky's internal cohesion, their adaptability under stress, and the intangible effects of mental warfare in a high-stakes league. Cunningham's calculated action, therefore, transcended the immediate drama. It became a defining moment in the ongoing conversation about mental strength, team psychology, and the subtle yet powerful ways players shape the outcome of games beyond mere athletic skill. What happened with Sophie Cunningham didn't just shake a single game or a single team, it sent ripples throughout the entire WNBA ecosystem, raising profound questions about player agency, league governance, and the shifting power dynamics in professional women's basketball. Historically, the league has operated within a rigid framework. Players follow league protocols, coaches dictate strategy, and referees control the pace of play. Yet Cunningham's bold move shattered that narrative, demonstrating that individual players now wield unprecedented influence not just through their performance, but through their capacity to challenge norms, spotlight inconsistencies, and galvanize teammates. The long-term implications are multifaceted. For players, it underscores a growing trend toward empowerment, where athletes are no longer passive participants in the system, but active architects of their environment. Cunningham's public stance signaled to other players that speaking out, taking action, and advocating for fairness isn't just permissible, it can be transformative. This could encourage a new era of player-led accountability, forcing coaches, management, and league officials to rethink policies, disciplinary measures, and even officiating standards. From a league perspective, the incident raises challenging questions about oversight, fairness, and media narratives. The WNBA now faces a critical decision point. Will it continue to rely on traditional hierarchies, or will it embrace the evolving role of players as co-stewards of the league's reputation and integrity? How the league responds could shape public perception, sponsorship opportunities, and the broader cultural narrative surrounding women's professional basketball. Failure to adapt could risk alienating a generation of empowered athletes who are increasingly unwilling to tolerate opacity, inconsistency, or biased treatment. Moreover, the cultural impact cannot be overstated. Fans are watching closely, and moments like Cunningham's resonate far beyond the hardwood. Young athletes, especially girls, see a player using her platform to assert authority, demand respect, and catalyze change. It reinforces the idea that leadership isn't just about talent, it's about courage, integrity, and the willingness to challenge the status quo. The event has already inspired social media conversations, opinion pieces, and debates about what it truly means to be a professional athlete in the modern era. Finally, Cunningham's actions highlight a broader societal shift in sports. The recognition that athletes are multidimensional figures whose influence extends into cultural, psychological, and ethical realms. Her move may well mark a turning point in the WNBA's evolution, signaling an era where players no longer simply play the game, they redefine it, challenge its limitations, and empower the next generation to demand more from